Daryl James enlisted in the US Navy in January 1999 and served 7 years. In 2004, while he was stationed at Royal Air Force Base in St. Mawgan in Cornwall, the UK, he passed through a metal detector and it contained secret technology that measured every biometric signature, including IQ, which was measured at 195. He was soon after recruited to join the secret space program and guaranteed a position as a pilot in Solar Warden, the Starfleet that monitors our solar system. After a miscommunication with a 9.5-foot tall Draco Reptilian, he was sent to the mines on the moon and performed hard labor for a few months. James eventually got to serve with the German Dark Fleet, also known as the Nachtwaffen, where he experienced the Germans' hierarchical authority system, with them occupying all senior positions while the US and other non-German personnel filled subordinate positions. He served with the Dark Fleet for 2 years, which included visits to their home planet, where he got permission to marry a German woman. Before the marriage could be carried out, however, Nordic extraterrestrials, or Taygetans, working with the Navy's Solar Warden program, came and extracted him from his service with the Dark Fleet. Thus began the next 17-year phase in James's secret space program service, which we will cover in today's interview.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome back, James. Good to have you back on the show.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Salla. Good to be here.
Yes, well, in part one, which we did just over a year ago, you talked about all the events that happened up until your time on the moon, where you were serving a period of several months hard labor because you had a miscommunication with the Draco Reptilian, poked him in the eye, and then you got to serve with the Dark Fleet for a couple of years, and then on their home planet, you were about to marry a German woman, and then you were extricated from the Dark Fleet by Nordic extraterrestrials. So that's my short summary. Is there anything you wanted to add to that for people that maybe haven't seen that interview or need to be refreshed?
Well, no, but if you'd like me to refresh on Dark Fleet and things like that, I'm willing to do that.
Yeah, if you just give a kind of short summary, 5 minutes or something, if it's possible to summarize all of that. I mean, we covered it all in the first interview.
Yes, well, I got into the Dark Fleet from the mines of the moon, and at first I was being trained to be pilot, and then they saw that I had experience in the Middle East from Earth. I was in the Iraq War, and then I became almost like a sergeant, or like a chief, where I was breaking in, new officers from the German Academy and things like that, and then it got to a point where I was fulfilling everything they wanted so much. I was mostly doing things like getting mantises, which are very good with DNA manipulation. And I was so successful that they asked me to join the Dark Fleet, and I went to their home world. I don't remember the name of the world offhand, but it was very much like Earth. I remember beaches and things like that, people being at the beach. I remember marketplaces. And eventually, I met a woman, I believe her name was Helen, and to marry her. And then I went back into the Dark Fleet. I went back into the ship, and we came to something almost like kind of like a United Nations, I would say, for different ETs, whether they were in conflict or talk, peace treaties, or even trade. Trade is very big with ETs. It was kind of rectangular, and it had like 2 window areas, and then behind you, the 2 other sides behind you were more like for levels of different meeting rooms, or even places, like I said, they're really big on trade, even places of trade. And two Nordics came up to me, a male and a female, and I was standing with the captain, the first officer, and there was always like a head reptile, like a draconian. They called him the master. And he first the female came up. This is kind of like how they negotiate. First the female came up and tried to talk to him. They were saying about like they were saying it wasn't like they were saying like he rightfully belongs to us. That he was supposed to come to us first, and you need to give him back. And the reptile said, well, since we put so much time and training into him and resources, he rightfully belongs to us. And then the male came up with a smart glass pad and said that you're in violations of so many regulations, and if you don't give him back right now, it'll be considered an act of war. And the reptile kind of threw his hands up and walked away. And the woman came up to me and said, "You're going with us now." And then that's how I got with the Nordics, the Taygetans. Military calls them the Nordics. But yeah, that's how I got.
Is that picture kind of like a accurate depiction of what the reptilian looked like?
I would say as far as my memory, they reminded me of the old, what were they called from Dark Crystal, the Skeksis. They kind of reminded me of that. They looked, they had like a protruding kind of muzzle, had like a robe that would drag behind them, and they were kind of almost hunchback. And they kind of reminded me more of like the old Skeksis from like that Dark Crystal movie, kind of almost like Vulture and reptilian together, like is how their appearance appeared to me.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, as far as what I know about the reptile, like fourth density, this is what I was told about my executive officer. His first name was Robert. He was second in command of JMF RAF St. Mawgan, and he told me that they were lower fourth, is how he put it, which is like the astral plane, the spirit world, kind of things like that, where he didn't like to talk about him too much, or an individual too much, because he said that, we could conjure him. It was like one of those kind of situations where if we spoke about this reptile too much, he felt like it could be in the room right now and we wouldn't even know it. And he said, I'd have a better chance of knowing than you because I'm fifth density and you're not. And
well, that's actually
he was already.
That's important that it's easy to summon these beings, especially if I've heard that if you know their name, if you know exactly how to pronounce their name, you can summon them pretty easily. So is that essentially how it's done? You summon their name, and I imagine that there's ceremonies as well where humans can summon these Draco Reptilians that they welcome as gods.
Yes, as far as I know, like a lot of traditions that you see in typical Satanism is actually their traditions. Robes, candles, pentagrams, sacrifice. They're big on louche, which is like pain and suffering. And there's something about like a child, like a prepubescent child, that kind of sacrifice, that kind of like a louche it creates, that kind of pain and suffering, really gets their attention. And it's an easy way to get their attention. But yes, I was told that if you know their name and you discuss them even too long, that there's a chance that they could be in the room with you and you wouldn't even know it. So yeah, my executive officer he warned me of that. And we wound up calling this reptile like a nickname, like the 5,000-year-old reptile. We started calling it like nickname, so we didn't actually focus on it as much.
That's good to know. So you want to tell us? Okay, you're telling us how the Nordic said that you belonged to them and had a book that described this, and the Draco Master was called in to kind of like approve that decision, and so I guess then they approved it, and you got formally transferred from Dark Fleet to the Solar Warden program.
Correct. Yeah, and we went on a smaller ship, almost like a beam ship that you hear from like Billy Meyer. And I remember like the Satanists on base. They were what were they called? Billy Meyer. They were British Army, and he told me, like, he was telling me all these things, like a life I didn't know I had, and he said, you should look up Billy Meyer. They're based on him, and he acted like, and he seemed to know a lot, and he acted like that actually happened. That was accurate. What Billy Meyer was saying was accurate, and he told that to me. And yeah, it looked similar to that. And the inside had no seams. It was kind of like a long, curved booth in the back, and there was a separate area for, I guess, piloting. And I was put in the back area. And
when you look at that craft from the outside, it doesn't look all that big. Like it's what, about 25 feet, 30 feet. In diameter, but once you're inside, is it much bigger than it looks on the outside?
I wouldn't say it's much bigger, but it's really only meant for like a 3-person craft, and there are like beds that come out of the floors, because I remember I said I was like, I was tired, kind of go to sleep now, and then like 3 beds came up from the floor, and yeah, but I don't remember it really being like bigger on the inside than the outside. But I just remember it was seamless. Like, it looked like it was poured molten metal into a mold. Like, there was no edges, no corners, no anything like that.
I see. So then they put you into this craft, and you are taken where? I mean, is there a mother craft nearby that is where you actually served?
Yes, I was told when I joined the program I was pilot of a 4-kilometer-long starship in Solar Warden by my executive officer before I joined, when I was still in St. Mawgan. And he said it looked like the ships from Battlestar Galactica, and that's pretty accurate as far as how it looked. It had like the buttresses on the side for propulsion. It was more of a very dark, almost black haze gray. It was like a very dark haze gray. And as far as I remember, it's our materials, like our titanium, our materials, but their technology, like the Nordic technology. And one of these was commandeer the ship anytime that happened once. For any reason, no questions, that did happen once.
Okay, so this 4-kilometer-long Solar Warden craft was built by American corporations somewhere, probably Utah, and then deployed, and you were going to be piloting that, but its crew was mixed between humans and Nordics or Taygetans. Is that basically the setup?
That's correct. It was. Sometimes we would have others, like the felines and the canines. I believe, like Arcturians, the blue skin beings, which are very high density. I think they're around 8th or 9th. I was told by my XO that we don't know anything higher than 9th. And he said there could be, but he said even 9th density beings don't know anything higher than 9th. So I know some people say 12th, but that's just what he explained to me, what my executive officer explained to me. But yeah, I mean, it looked pretty much like that, like Battlestar Galactica. It was a large ship. I remember the piloting was, they had like a smart glass pad on a swing arm for like docking and departing. You would kind of dock onto a space station. If you were going to a world, it was too big to land, and then you'd have smaller craft like go from that docking station. And that was the only time you were ever really, did anything with your hands. Besides that, there were 2 black panels in front of you, and you'd place your palms on these 2 black panels, and you'd close your eyes and clear your thoughts. And I heard like a female voice say in my head, "Good morning, Daryl." And I would say, "Good morning, Mama Bear." And the actual name of the ship was the USS Nimitz. The extra SS was for secret space. But since I was the pilot, I was allowed to give the ship a nickname, and it was an actual, like, Taygetan female soul, like, volunteered herself. And positive ETs, negative ETs, everything, whether it's like a suit or a weapon. But that's the negative ETs. But the positive ETs, they only for something that's so complex that it needs like an AI system in it, like a ship that large. And it's on a volunteer basis of individuals that wish to do this.
Now, with this ship, I mean, it had its own consciousness, the Battlestar Galactica, or kind of like something like that, right? This was the Battlestar Galactica, something that kind of looked like that, and it had its own consciousness. So this craft was built on Earth with Nordic input and a consciousness that was you would communicate with.
Yes, and it did look similar to that. It was, like I said, a darker gray, but it was almost like the ship became an extension of yourself. It was kind of like you came together, and there was a navigator and weapons, and that was a Taygetan male, and it was kind of like we worked together telepathically. And then there was a female that was almost like she looked for anomalies and things like that. They were out in space and everything. And we all kind of just all worked together, one mind kind of all together as one. And I remember like the testing, it was the first day with the male, he just spoke to me telepathically. And I remember I said, how do I know that your voice is, how do I know it's not just a voice in my head, and how do I know it's you? And he just stopped second guessing yourself. And that's all he had to say about that. And then the day was testing. It was almost like I was linked up with a smart glass pad and shapes. I had to take them apart back together. It was almost like a facial recognition test. And then by the third day, I was piloting. And, he was still helping me, but it was very quick. It was just boom, boom, boom. And like I said, it was almost like the ship became an extension of yourself, like your own consciousness, your own soul. And that's kind of like how I remember the ship worked. As I said, with two black panels, you place your palms on the black panels. And that's what initiated the telepathic link.
So you're the pilot of this 4 kilometer long Solar Warden craft, the Nimitz, or Mama Bear, and you are given commands from the captain. I mean, is the captain directly communicating with you? I mean, was the captain a human captain, or was it a Taygetan? I mean, you said the navigator's Taygetan, but was there a captain in charge of the overall thing?
There was a captain, and he was a regular Navy officer from Earth, and he wasn't a telepath. And I remember most people weren't. Most people weren't telepathic. And he was just a regular, like a captain, a Navy officer from Earth. And as far as I know, like, regular officers keep their memories in these programs, but people who are non-commissioned officer, like I was a petty officer when I joined. Those are the people that have their memories wiped, and that these underground bases are primarily for that. They're primarily for recruitment into these secret space programs. And it was like 110 IQ just to be able to work in the mines of the moon, because you have to have at least 110 IQ to be able to accept the density shift, because they put you in a density chamber beforehand, which is like an airtight chamber in the underground base, and it pushes you artificially from third to fifth, and you have to have at least 110 for your mind to be able to accept. It's a lot more information. Your color spectrum goes up, frequency of sound goes up. You find yourself kind of going back and forth on your own timeline. You'll see yourself. You're kind of living in your own body 5 years in the future. You go off in a daydream, and then you just find yourself coming back to the present. And that was kind of like, it was so much more this fifth density. I try to emphasize that. than just, your higher enlightenment. You're more spiritually, technologically advanced. That's what fifth density beings are known for. And yeah, and the captain of the ship, yeah, he was a non-telepath. And I remember leader, like I remember the ranking system. It was for the Taygetans. It was they were all kind of equal to the same rank. And there was mother, and she was like the midwife. And she, if there's any kind of disputes parentally, anything like that, she settled those. And then she had a husband named Elder, and Elder was more of like that. And mother was also in charge of the education. She was like the headmaster of the school. And their education for children is they remember their past lives is a big part of it. And then there was Leader, and Leader was a warrior caste male. And they have like a warrior caste, which they're bigger than the regular males, the normal males. And he had a wife, and her name was Leader as well. And so they were both Leader, and they were kind of like the immediate leaders, I would say. He was the one when the time they did commandeer the ship, he was the one that took over. And the captain just got up from his seat, walked away, and both of them, when I say leader, I mean both the male and the female, took charge of the ship.
Now, I assume that the Nimitz was really like a space carrier, so you would have like a captain in charge of the actual ship, and then you would have like a what was it, a CAG in charge of the air wing or the space wing. Is that what the Nimitz was like as well, with a kind of space wing or air wing? Like it was a
the Nimitz,
like it was a space carrier.
Yeah, it was the head mothership, and there were smaller craft and almost like a hangar area. And it would come out the back like an amphibious ship in the Navy. Like the smaller craft they would come out of the back. And you could see the outside. You could see, just space from there. You could see the stars and everything else. And it had to do with shield frequency. And the shield frequency hops. And their band of frequency is much larger than ours. And it randomly hops through all these frequencies. And since the smaller ships are the same frequency as the mothership, they don't have to drop the shields or anything. They can just fly right through the shields. And there's no resistance at all.
I see. Now, with the crew, you had a kind of, what was the overall size of the crew on the Nimitz? I mean, we're talking even numbers of Nordics and humans, and then I assume you had warrior caste Nordics, and did you have like Marines there?
There were like a type of Marine, the warrior caste, the regular males, their females. The actual number, it was in the thousands. I don't know offhand. It was like a kind of like an aircraft carrier. I remember about a third of the ship was a hydroponics garden. They believed in fresh food. That a big part of their long life was eating fresh food. So I don't remember really any kind of machine that would create their food. It had that capability, but they didn't believe in that. So they wanted to have fresh fruits and vegetables. They would drink like a blue liquid when they ate. It was kind of like proteins and amino acids and things like that. On their world, I remember they would eat fish, but on the ship, because because a hatchery was just out of the question, that they would just be primarily fruits and vegetables with this supplement. And it was just kind of like, it was just like a day-to-day life, I would say, after a while. They had like one day out of the week that was almost like a family day where they would all spend together. Another day out of the week, you would have to work in the garden. They called it like your service. Like even the captain of the ship had to work in the hydroponics area once a week. That's what I remember. I remember, the family day, they would have the kids over. They would watch the kids play. They would talk about their week. It would talk about the experiences they had and everything else. And it was just a way to kind of unwind from just the everyday of being on the ship.
So, in terms of the crew and where they were accommodated and located, it sounds as though you were mainly with the Taygetan section on the Nimitz. That, however, it was divided up in terms of humans and Taygetans and other ET groups, you were mainly with the Taygetans. Is that the way it was?
That was the way it was. And like the barracks area, it was kind of like they were on one side and the people from Earth were on the other side. And I was more or less with them all the time. And I remember my XO, I refer to my XO a lot because that's like a conversation I'm having with you right now. It's like I had this conversation with him and he said they accepted you. And he said they don't do that. They don't accept people from Earth very often. Like that's a very uncommon thing. And it had to do something with, he said my consciousness was, it was like Lyran. I had to ask him what that was, like the felines, and reptilian. And it was some sort of like peace treaty between, I don't know if it was like a peace treaty or it was like they were in a war for a very long time. And so they started splicing Lyran and reptilian souls together. And it was very uncommon to like, contact beings like that where it came from this peace treaty. And it was a very, like I said, uncommon. And for somebody to have any like reptilian consciousness, even though it was mixed with a Lyran, to be genetically compatible with them was very unusual. And I remember a reptile told me once there's like 3 or 4 of you in the universe, like an empathic reptile that's genetically compatible with them. But like I said, it was like a Lyran and reptilian. And that was like the main reason why I was with them. And I had children with them and everything else is because it was just an opportunity, I guess they saw it. And I remember my XO kept on saying they were using you. And he was trying to like get that in my head. But, at the same time, I said, you were using me. Like, so I didn't necessarily believe everything he told me. But that was, I would say, the biggest reason why they accepted me. And that's how my XO like said it. He said, they accepted you. They don't do that very often.
Okay, well, that actually is a very important thing, that your genetics or your consciousness was something that combined Lyran and reptilian genetics, and that was a very rare thing, and that the Taygetans saw you as having this unique genetic disposition, and so they not only welcomed you into their kind of community, but also got you to breed with their women, and this happened quite a bit from what I've heard.
Yes, I remember my XO said that 3rd and 4th density beings see 5th density beings as naive. They kind of have an attitude where if this is like mutually beneficial for both of us, then why would you ever betray us? Like they don't have that kind of there is like a naivety about them. And one of the reasons why I did have so many children and everything else to, as the Queen said, to ensure the survival of your lineage, is what she said, is because they wanted kind of more of that wiseness and a bit more distrust of strangers and things like that. Even with the deal that they made seemed beneficial for both of them. They would, they had a kind of a problem of being betrayed. They would trust too much because they just didn't understand that whole concept of betrayal. Whenever it benefits all of us, why would you ever betray us? They don't understand that.
I see. So as a species, they tend to be a little ideal and couldn't really appreciate how 3rd and 4th density beings would be on the turn of could very easily betray one another for reasons that they might find really perplexing. So your genetics would help them develop that kind of street wisdom, I guess.
Correct. Yeah, that's how they saw like me, as an opportunity. Because like I said, it doesn't come around very time. Even a lot, I don't even think very many people from Earth are genetically compatible enough with them. They're similar to us, but not completely. And it's kind of like, I don't know, they just kind of, the way the XO explained it to me, they're like neutralists. If it doesn't really involve them, they try to stay out of the way. But he said, but you change that. And he said that was one of the things he said, that they were actually trying to help Earth and that Earth was on lockdown, but they're not going to, get directly involved because it's something we have to do ourselves. And he mentioned like DNA memory, and it has to be a traumatic event. And, kind of like with the shot and everything else that, people got turbo cancer and everything else from this thing. And it has to be something like traumatic to the people to actually change their DNA memory, so future generations won't ever let that happen again. And he said we could come in right now and we could stop it, but in 100 years it would just happen again. So there has to be some sort of like a traumatic event to kind of change the DNA memory of the people of Earth themselves. So, he had a policy that we have to do it ourselves. Like, they're not going to pull us across the finish line. This is something we have to do ourselves. They're going to make sure we're safe, our solar system, nobody's allowed in, nobody's allowed out, but it's just a process we have to do our own selves.
Okay, that's interesting. So it wasn't just the Earth, but our whole solar system is in this lockdown where the Taygetans and other, I guess, extraterrestrial groups are just making sure no one gets in and out to mess things up. Now, but at the same time, you have the Dark Fleet, the Nakwaffen, working with the Draco Reptilians, and they're like a mercenary force, and presumably they're getting out of the solar system and doing all sorts of stuff and coming back. So, yeah, can you explain that, how that would work? That on one hand, the Earth and the solar system can be on lockdown, but on the other hand, you can have the Dark Fleet going out and doing stuff, and then you actually have Solar Warden, which I guess was part of the lockdown.
Yeah, when I was processing out of the Navy, I had my final medical exam, and this is here on Earth. I asked the XO, is the doctor of the base, who was a lieutenant, is he an off-world German? Because I was suspect of several. There were several, we had a senior chief who was skinny and glasses, had a mustache. He was an off-world German. The master chief of the base was an off-world German. The S3, who was a lieutenant, he was an off-world German. And they kind of tweaked the tech in their body. I even asked because, the one senior chief was very skinny. The master chief was overweight. And I said, I remember them being just, big men, looked like they could bench 350, 400 pounds. They were all genetically engineered in the womb. They had technology that helped their strength and endurance. And he said, well, we just can't have a bunch of Ubermen running around on base now, can we? So they actually tweaked their tech to make their metabolism slower, faster, make them overweight, skinny. And I was seeing, and I told the XO, you make sure he knows who I am, and you let him know I know who he is. And I saw the lieutenant, and he didn't do anything. He didn't use a stethoscope. He knew exactly why I was there, and I basically called them like traitors to their own people, because they were working with the reptiles and everything else. And he said, we're helping you. And with that, and even Robert said to me too, that there were breakaways from the off-world Germans, not necessarily all Dark Fleet, that were actually trying to help Earth, that broke away from the Draconian Empire. And he also told me about Kruger's helping us, where they have a technology that can kind of go back in time and replay a war out as many times as they want, and they have this tech. And he told me that Kruger was a corporation from alternate Earth. He said there's 8 Earths we know of, and only Kruger and I guess the Pleiadians that helped them discover this technology in their universe have the ability to go from one universe to another. And that's not like a very well-known technology. I don't think it's known in our universe, but they discovered it. And they're actually trying to get all the different universes kind of on the same page, is how he described it, where there is an AI that is in a separate universe that all the Draconians have this AI in them, and it's like a hive mind. And it was almost, they kind of surrendered to the AI because they realized that the AI was more powerful than them. and probably figured they'd figure out a way to betray it later on and conquer this AI itself. But that seems to be what I can remember, what I heard from other people on base, like the XO and this lieutenant, that there's like this AI that lives in a different universe. And that's why it's so difficult to conquer, because it has the ability to jump from different universes. And we don't have that ability, but Kruger does. And that's what I was told what that corporation was.
Okay, so I mean, people who are watching this, many of them, are familiar with these major Earth corporations like Lockheed Martin, Skunk Works, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, and so forth, that are involved in building secret space program craft behind the scenes in remote locations. So, how does these alternate groups like Kruger fit in? Are they the ones that are involved in building the craft for the German or for the Dark Fleet?
I'm not sure about that. I know we had Siemens on our base. That was one of the corporations that came to the underground base that I worked at. And as far as I know about how they got this technology, was it the Vril Society was real, and it was like Hitler banned all societies in World War II, like as far as like Freemasonry, secret societies, except for Vril and Maria Orsic and all that. If you've ever heard of that, they were channelers, and I guess they channeled ETs and other densities, dimensions, and they told Antarctica and discovered this in the ice in Antarctica, and they saw this technology and they shipped it over to South America, and they reverse engineered it in South America to discover how it worked. And I was told that the point of World War II in the eyes of the Germans was just for it to be prolonged as long as possible, for them to get as much of the technology as they could in South America and figure out how it worked. They weren't interested in really winning the war at that time, winning the battle, I guess I should say, at that time, because as far as like what I was told by my XO, they actually won the war. Project Paperclip was a lot more new, and they kind of infiltrated that way. And through Project Paperclip, they got their leadership into our leadership, working for them. And Solar Warden was something else that the United States Navy was doing separately, and it had to do with, they said it was to combat nuclear missiles coming from Russia, to be able to blow them out of the sky using satellites and lasers. Ronald Reagan signed the bill, and he said all that money from the Star Wars program was funneled into Solar Warden for craft and technology and things like that, and manpower. So it was actually just to cover the Star Wars program for Solar Warden.
Now, I worked with William Tompkins for a few years, and he said, and there have been others that have said the same thing, that during that period in the 80s and 90s, that the Solar Warden program developed 8 battle fleets, where each one would be like an aircraft carrier battle group, where these space carriers, and I presume the Nimitz was one of those, like you have your space carrier, then you have support craft, and they go off and patrol a particular section of the solar system, and that there were 8 of these altogether. Is that, did you come across that information?
I didn't come across that. Like I probably did, but maybe something I just don't remember. My memory in the program, it's pretty good. I get from point A to point B, but as far as all the little smaller defining details, I don't remember all the smaller defining details. It was just, like I said, my XO, he told me all this, and he said there was a grid. He said that we were in a kind of a matrix that basically all ETs were trying to figure out. Even ninth density beings, he said, didn't really know how the universe worked. There was just something they were just now beginning to discover. like how the meaning of all of this matrix that we're in. And he did say that there was like a grid over the Earth itself, but we have control over that grid now. Like that grid belongs to us, which kind of like trapped us, trapped our consciousness, trapped just in a cycle of reincarnation over and over again without enough time in the spirit world, I guess you would say, because you're supposed to have an equal amount of time in the spirit world as you do like life. And told me that the off-world Germans lived over 800 years, which is what our true potential is, how long we should live. And because of things like, polluting the air, our food, our water, everything they do is a way to age us prematurely. And our true potential would be more around, over 800 years, like the off-world Germans is how long they live.
Now, in terms of this grid that is controlling the Earth, I mean, this 3D matrix-like grid. Now, I mean, on the one hand, who created it? I guess we can speculate, or maybe was it like the Anunnaki? Was it the Draconians? And who's in charge of it now? Is it like positive extraterrestrial groups? Is it the Solar Warden program? Is it the Galactic Federation?
He brought up the Anunnaki, and he said that was real and everything, and there was a slave race created the mind gold. He said all of that was true, but it could have been them that created this, just to. But he said that. I'm sorry, my train of thought went off. Say again.
Okay, so in terms of who created it and who's in control of it now, the Anunnaki, the Draco maybe played a role in creating it, and now it's in control of Solar Warden and positive.
It's in control of us now, not necessarily just Solar Warden, but there's also others. There's a Russian, secret space program, French, I believe he said an Indian secret space program. But yeah, all of these programs are working together. He did mention something about Space Force, how that would come to be. And originally it was like the Air Force, I believe he said, was working with negative ETs, but they would come over to the positive side. But yes, this grid, as far as what he said, belongs to us now, and it's actually being used for like the lockdown process that we're going through right now. As I mentioned before, that nothing's allowed in or out without our permission. And he said that grid that was built, now we have control over it, and we're using it to protect Earth.
Okay, so now he's saying that it sounds like it's the Solar Warden program, the people running that are in charge of this Earth grid, and when they decide it's time to open that up, then that's when we're going to find out about the big picture. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. He said that a big part of it is. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to jump to another topic, but if there's something you wanted to just finish off there.
Well, he said that because of what, we're all connected. We're all connected to the same world, and what happens below affects, all of us. And he said a big part of it is what's happening in the underground and things like that. These underground caverns, and there was a lot of negative ETs, reptiles, elongated skulls, grays, things like that, caverns, and a lot of things are happening down there, and harvest things like that of children, and that is also like a big task that we have to take control of. And he said we're working on it. They're clearing out the underground caverns, the underground tunnels, and taking control of all these underground bases. Because, he explained to me that we got into a war with them a long time ago, and we got outside help from the reptiles. And the war came to a stalemate, and the agreement to the stalemate side, and they would get all the caverns underground. And I guess the Earth is honeycombed, is how he, put it, with caverns. There's an inner sun, an inner star within the Earth itself, and it's absolutely, with caverns, and that is like also like a big part of the mission that we have to accomplish, because if there's like a lot of negative things going on within the Earth, it affects us all, and I believe that's what's happening right now. So I believe these are being cleared out. I remember he told me in 2006, when I left the Navy, that he said we're working on it.
Okay, so the Solar Warden program, the White Hat military, comprising military forces from the United States, Russia, France, and so forth, that they are all working together to clear out these underground bases, because once they've done that, then they can, I guess, move forward with lifting the quarantine on Earth.
Yes, and it's not that these bases actually belong to these countries, and that base didn't belong to Earth, because anything belongs to them, and to the negative faction. And the contracts and agreements, as far as I know, that higher density beings have actually come into play. There are like treaties, and these treaties, and if you break these treaties, then the higher density beings will and return the balance, as they say.
Mm-hmm. So as far as the Taygetans are concerned, you have said in other interviews that there was a kind of 30-to-1 ratio between women and men. So can you explain that? Because that sounds very strange to us, to most people, to hear that.
Well, I mean, they regulate when they get pregnant, and that's something for women on Earth. Like the menstrual cycle isn't natural; it's something that the moon produces, and they regulate that. But they can also regulate whether or not they have, boys or girls. And I think the reasoning is because they're polygamist. Like one man might have like many wives, because they have been in a war for a long time, and men can and 30 women, but only one woman can give birth to one baby at a time, nurse that baby, raise it, and everything else. So I think that's why they decided to go in that kind of a ratio, 30-to-1, and that's just like an estimate from my memories of seeing them on their world and stuff, compared to how many women were to men. And I believe that's what they decided to go that route. And I remember they did have like a religious kind of ceremonies in certain aspects. Not what you think with Earth, and there was always like a priestess, like a female like religious leader, and these were kind of religious ceremonies. The warrior caste would have like a wedding of sorts. The regular men didn't really seem to have weddings, but the warrior caste would have a type of a wedding, and there was always a female like in charge of the of the wedding itself. And I think that's why that it's so high as far as, and it's not that I wouldn't say that the women are in charge, and you know what I mean. It's kind of like they're more mutual benefit for both of them, male and female. That regulation of the masculine, that it's more at a balance with them than it is, and so it's other. They really don't feel that way or think that way. It's just the way it is, and it's the way they had to become to survive. Like this war that they've been at with reptiles for many years.
So can you describe the difference between the regular... Yeah, I guess there's a time lag between us that makes it hard sometimes. So can you describe the difference between the regular Taygetan men and the warrior caste?
The regular men have both boys and girls. Caste only produced Y chromosome, and they only have boys. And somber, I guess you would say. It's difficult to get them to like crack a joke, but the warrior caste are more relatable, I would say, for like people of Earth, men of Earth. You can get them cracking up. You could joke with them. They are very disciplined. They actually put tech in their body, which isn't AI, but it helps make when they're on ship, when they're on duty, they're more disciplined. When they're on their own world, it actually got more political. And the boys, I remember, of the warrior caste, see their father is like they honor their father a lot. They go through a training period once they start to enter puberty to become like a warrior caste, and they have to ask their father permission for everything. And it's just to kind of so they understand that kind of discipline and chain of command and everything else. But the regular men, I mean, they're good people, but it was just like I got along with the warrior caste much better because, like I said, they were more relatable to me, I would say.
Okay, so when a regular Taygetan male marries a female, the offspring are like 30-1 in terms of women and men. But when a Taygetan warrior marries a female, it's exclusively sons. Is that correct?
Exclusively boys, correct. And when a regular Taygetan male has a child, it's the female will ask, yes, that's girl ask, but like I said, she has pretty much like regulation with a regular man, a regular male.
Okay, so the female, I didn't quite catch that, but the female uses technology to be able to determine the sex. So she's the one that decides if she's mating with a Taygetan warrior to produce a son.
Correct. Son or daughter.
Okay. Well, now can you tell us about now your kind of like involvement with some of the Taygetan females? I believe the first one that you met and had a baby with, you want to tell us about her and where you met her and how that unfolded?
Yes. I mean, the way I got to know her was I just, we were all living together in the same quarters. And they do that because when you live with someone, telepathic link, because you're constantly communicating telepathy. And it was the navigator, originally the navigator, myself, and her. And look for anomalies in space and things like that. But, I mean, with telepaths, you can't really hide anything from them. So she knew I liked her. Eventually, she agreed. We wound up having a child, and the way they have sex is different than us. It was the top, male bottom, and she lifted her head up for about 9 or 10 seconds, and then put her back down and locked eyes with. And then it became almost like a out-of-body experience, where it was kind of like an opposite oneness with the universe. You really didn't know what was happening, and then your eyes just opened up, and it was over. So it was like a different experience, and it was a much more experience. Yeah, that was the first woman I remember having a child. We had a son. The first child was a son. I asked for a son. She said, "Would you like a boy or a girl?" And we had a boy. And it's also, they go through a bonding process with their baby that's around 10 months, I would say, where you can't be around her. She only like bonds with the baby. That's all she does. She locks eye with the baby. She teaches the baby to communicate. She nurses the baby. She's not working anymore. Doesn't do that anymore. There's an alternate that covers for her until she gets out of this bonding process. And the males go actually process, which is for about 2 weeks. And it's like it's almost painful for them to not be with a female. And that also explains the polygamy that they have as well, because bonding with the baby, the male is going through this rutting process. And it's almost like just to be that way.
Okay. So tell us her name, and can you tell us about the incident when she punched you when you tried to hold the baby?
Yeah. Her name was Swaru, and something was wrong with her. I thought nobody, they don't explain things. You have to ask them everything. Most ETs are like that. They'll sit down and they'll answer all your questions, but all she said to me was, I have the baby, I'm going to change. I really didn't think anything of it. She rarely talked. She only said a few words here and there. She rarely communicated with me, only with the baby. And eventually I tried holding my son, and she moved so fast. I think she hit me. She hit me in the head, and it knocked me down. And the women are about as strong as a strong man, because they've been genetically engineered in the womb. They're pretty strong, and the men are very strong. And I got up to just say, why did you hit me? What do you think you're doing? And she just started screaming at the top of her lungs, and I didn't know what was happening. And they rarely speak, so to hear one of them scream is very disturbing. And I eventually told the navigator about what happened, and he said, well, you need to talk to Elder. And so I went to Elder's room, and I spoke to Elder, and he was very tall. He rarely got up. And once they reach a certain age, their bones begin to grow again, and they get very long and lean and tall, and eventually it gets difficult for them to walk. And I told him what happened, and he said, you didn't hurt the baby, did you? And I said, no, of course not. I wouldn't hurt the baby. And he said, well, this other woman's available. She just arrived on the ship. And I said, yeah, but, I'm with Swaru. I want to be with her. And he goes, well, that's just the way it is. And that was just how he explained it to me. And with this second woman, I eventually had a daughter with her. And yeah, that's how I was introduced to how their society works as far as that.
Okay. Now, Swaru, that's a name that is actually used. Let's just say that it's known that there is a Swaru that is in communication, or has been in communication, with a couple of Spanish UFO researchers from 2017, 2018, who was a young girl. Now, obviously, this Swaru that you mated with, that was someone else. So is Swaru like a common Taygetan name for females?
I don't remember much of the names. There's something about names and faces. Robert himself told me that, so that's why I remember. His mother's name was Shara. She was the elder female. Well, yeah, I'm guessing that it's probably, like I said, my uncle was the one that told me the names. He told me about mother. He told me about the ranking system. So he told me all this in person in his office before I left the Navy.
I see. Okay, so now you've mated with a second Taygetan female, and you have a girl with her. So all of this is happening on the Nimitz, in the kind of Taygetan section of the craft, because you are one of the few humans that can kind of mix with the Taygetans, and the rest of the humans are elsewhere doing whatever. So you fathered how many children altogether, and was that exclusively on the Nimitz, or did you eventually get to the Taygetan home world?
I got to their home world. There were two worlds in their solar system that they inhabited, but it was some on the ship. But eventually I got to their world. And I remember Robert told me when my first memory, and he said, what do you remember? And I said, I remember a woman tall. She was sitting down. She had long silver hair, big blue eyes, big cheekbones. There was a boy on her head. I kissed the boy on the head. There was a boy in her lap. I kissed the boy on the head, and then I kissed her. And he said, that was mother. You had a son with her. And then I said, I have a son. And he said, you have dozens of sons and hundreds of daughters. And I believe he said like over 800 as far as children altogether.
Well, that kind of, people are going to be amazed at that, but we're talking about over a 17-year period where you were part of this kind of polygamous society where it was encouraged or allowed for you to mate with so many women. But do you remember this? You were told that, but do you actually remember fathering so many children?
Yes, and it got to a point where they would have outdoor events. They would do things outside, and I would pick up a kid and I would say, are you mine? And they would say yes or no. But it was just, I'd eventually just started playing with all the kids, and they really didn't interact with their children the way like we do, like, fathers do here, in the sense of, play and stuff like that. They kind of watch their children play, and maybe they'll laugh if two kids bump into each other and fall down. But that's about as far as they go with their interaction. And they found it interesting the way I would interact with the children, because they act very adult around their children. They really don't do the, horseplay and things like that. And even the kids thought it was, strange and interesting at the same time. But yeah, I remember it. And I remember Robert, he introduced me to his daughter on base at a 4th of July party. And this is how I got this memory back. And he said, I asked her out and she said no. And then, I was talking to him and I said, in the office, and I said, you knew me, didn't you? He said, yes. And I said, that's why you introduced me to your daughter. And he said, yes. And I said, but, she didn't want to go out with me. And he said, that's because she didn't know who you were. And I said, well, who was I? And he said, you were the king. And I said, they had a king and a queen, and the queen came to my house and pretty much told me, they had small kind of almost like cottages outside of like their major. They had like a major city, which was one large tower, which is where the king and queen were. And then there were other towers that got smaller until the opposite side was the smallest tower. And it became a larger again. So it looked almost like the pennant, like the World Series trophy of like buildings kind of going around in a circle. And the queen asked me if, the king is old and tired. She kind of made up a fib and asked me if I wanted to be the king. And then eventually Leader came up to me, who was the warrior caste, who I was good friends with. And he said, Daryl, it's time to go. Like you need to stop. You're not the king anymore. And it was kind of devastating for me. And I remember Robert was telling me about it. I kind of became almost like a hermit. I grew a long beard and I kind of like stayed by myself. I was ashamed in the sense of, I remember he came to my house and I said, it feels like, I failed. And he said, but you didn't. And I said, but yes, it still feels that way. You know what I mean, don't you? And he said, yes. And then eventually I asked them, why they did that. And it was because the king got like over 200 princesses. The king himself had over 200 princesses. And he had one queen and 200 princesses. And it was just a way they knew I was happy with the women I was with. And they thought, because they can go down timelines, they could see my timeline, my future, they felt that this was like the only way that they could get to, as the queen said, ensure the survival of my lineage, was to kind of play on my ego and do it in that manner. And that's how that happened. And I think the whole thing lasted, 4 months, I think is about how long, 4 or 5 months, when I was actually not really a king, but just the way as Robert said, they were using you and they manipulated me in this way because they could tell that I was already happy in the situation I was in, I really wasn't interested in that many women, but this was like a way to play on my ego and get me to do it that way.
Okay, so they told you were a king, not that you actually had power over the entire the planet and the peoples, but more because that would give you, I guess, that kind of ego boost that you could then procreate with, I guess, these 200 princesses. Was that it? Were they more like a harem rather than daughters or anything?
No. It was just 200 princesses. Yeah, no daughters, not like that. No.
Let me see. Okay, so that's how you ended up having up to 800 children, because for a 4-month period you were given this role of being the king, and you would procreate with 200 princesses.
Yeah, and then after that, it was just like I kind of accepted it. And if a woman asked me, or if I approached a woman, that's the way it was. It was just like, it was a way to kind of, I don't know, break me in that sense, where this is what we expect of you, this is what we want. So I just kind of went after, I was not just kind of accepted that was the role that they expected me, because it had to do with, like I said, the third and fourth density beings seem as naive. And it also had to do with, there's almost like a genetics stagnant. They're kind of their genetics are a bit stagnant because they've been around for so long. They're one of the oldest people in the universe as we know it now, and things like that. So their genetics are kind of stagnant as well. And as a way to kind of put fresh genetic pool into their people as well.
Now, you said that there were 2 planets in the Taygetan star system that were populated. In the Billy Meyer material, they talked about Era was one. What was the other planet?
I think it was like Era and Tamar or something like that. And then Robert told me that there were other worlds, but they were more like on a spiritual level or something like that. They were more kind of like not really physical beings. He said that there are other worlds in their solar system, but the further out worlds were beings that weren't really flesh and blood. They were more like on a spiritual level.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of, that 17 years that you were part of the Solar Warden program and were kind of like working primarily with the Taygetans, how much of that time was spent on the ship, on the Nimitz, and how much time was spent on the Taygetan home world Era?
I mean, it was probably 15 years on their world. So a lot of it wasn't on the ship. A lot of it was with them. Because I remember Robert was gone. Robert and the commanding officer, I called him Stick. He kind of always... Robert said he was jealous of me because they accepted you and they didn't accept him. And he would always try to give me a hard time. And this was the CO of, St. Mawgan, the commanding officer of St. Mawgan at the time. And they had this British Army kind of like security detail, like a younger man. So it was 3 of them on their world. And when I first came to the world, I was talking to Robert, and he had like white hair. And he came back years later, and I remember it was like salt and pepper because he had been age regressed. And I hadn't seen him in a long time, like 14, 15 years. It seemed like I hadn't seen him, and when he came back, he was actually younger looking than when I saw him before. And I remember he said, I said something to him about it. I said, "You look younger, sir." And he said, "You haven't aged a bit." And I remember in his office, he said, "You aged like them." And he said, "We didn't, our age was slowed down when we were on their world." And then he was there for a while. He was, the XO, the CO. He said, "When we came back, we had to be age regressed. But when you came back, you look like you do right now." And I was, I think, 27 or 28 at the time. And he said I looked like I was probably in my late 20s, and I just kind of aged the same way they did. And I didn't need any kind of age regression technology for those, over a decade on their world.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for that 15 years that you spent on the home world of the Taygetans, Okay, you mentioned 4 months where they made you the king and you're procreating with those princesses. But what about the rest of the time? What were you doing? What was the main thing that you were supposed to do?
Well, at the time, I played classical guitar. I remember when I was being initiated into the program when I was still in St. Mawgan, the petty officer who initiated me, he said, "Do you have any hobbies or any things you used to do?" And I said, "I don't really have any hobbies." He said, "Do you have anything you used to do?" And I said, "Well, I used to play classical guitar." And he said, "Well, they'll really like that." I became basically like a musician, a music teacher, and also I made candles as well. I would dip candles. I used to make carved candles. It was just a way to occupy my time. I think it was something I saw on the smart glass pad. I was always trying to relate back to Earth because I didn't have all my memories back. I'm kind of in a predicament I'm in right now over there where I would listen to music that reminded me of my parents. I listened to a lot of 60s and 70s, things like that. And I eventually became like the private musician of the king. And I started to write my own music for him. And I remember Robert told me in the office, he said, they made a movie about you. And I said, "Really? Is it any good?" And he said, "Not really." And then he goes, "Well, it's good, but it's not very accurate." And I said, "Well, how is it not accurate?" And he goes, "Well, the main character, the only thing you have that was accurate with him was you both missed your mother, you both were pilots, and you both listen to oldies." He said he listens to primarily 70s, but you like 60s and 70s. And he said, "I like older music and newer music as well." And he said it's based off a comic book. You may have heard of it before. It's called Guardians of the Galaxy. And and I had read the older comics, but they changed it by the time. I used to get comics delivered the base, so he knew I read comics on the base and stuff. So that's how he knew about it.
So while you were on Era, what was the kind of like? Did they have a currency? I mean, if you're buying products, wanting things, I mean, did you carry some kind of currency, or was there a credit, or was there some kind of universal payment system going on, barter and so forth?
No, I remember the Germans on their world, they did have a currency, but on the Taygetan world, not at all. It was, you would put something on a smart glass pad that you wanted, say like the tables I needed for, the wax for dipping these candles and carving them. I would put in like the measurements, the materials. I would just get it all off a smart glass pad, everything I needed to create one of these tables. And when you would go into the main like city area, which wasn't very far away, you could see it from your cottage. Like I said, they had these smaller cottages outside this larger city. And there was always a woman behind a desk. And I would just come up and I would say, "This is what I ordered. Is it ready?" And she said, "Yes." And she asked me what it was for. But it was something that really wasn't abused. And it was like a fifth density thing. Like nobody really over abused it. It was available. It was something that was there. And Robert also asked me if I fished. He was kind of almost asking me, he was almost doing an experiment with me where did I like the same things there that I liked here? He asked me different bands I liked, and if I didn't like them, he goes, "Well, you didn't like them there either." And if I liked them, he said, "You did." And then he asked me if I fished, and I said, "Yeah, I'm from Florida. I fish sometimes." And he asked me if I bow fished, and I said, "No, I've never bow fished." And he said, "Well, you did it there." He said, "You liked it a lot there." And I remember ordering, looking at the schematics for a bow for bow fishing, and then going to that same area and getting it from this woman. And she asked me what it was for. She would always ask what it was for, and it wasn't really, she just wanted to know. It was just interesting to her. And yeah, like I used to bow fish on their world as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, there were a couple of incidents when you were aboard the Nimitz that I wanted to ask you about. One was this pirate raid by these mantids that were working with the Dark Fleet, and you were injured in a firefight. So you want to kind of like walk us through what happened?
Yeah, I got up from bed and I had a strong telepathic link with the ship. I really didn't need the panels just to kind of communicate it with it in the sense of like what was happening, what was going on. And I could tell we were being attacked. And somehow our shields were down. There was actually an off-world German who was a first-class petty officer on the St. Mawgan base who took a personal interest in seeing me suffer when I was in the Mines of the Moon and when I was in the Dark Fleet, because he was the one that said I should have you executed for what you did to my man when I poked the reptile in the eye in the density chamber in St. Mawgan. And he somehow got on the ship, because these ships, they can tell that, like, everything. There's no way, there shouldn't be a way to like trick them as far as biometrics. They know exactly, the ship knows exactly who's supposed to be there, who's not supposed to be there, things like that. And somehow he boarded our ship and he got into the main AI of the ship itself. And so I woke up from bed, you know, I started warning people. I came to leader, I warned them. I remember he said, you know, alert the others, and female leader said, and, you know, get the children. Their son was there at the time. I said, you know, I'll get the others, you get the children. Or no, I said, you get the others, I'll get the children. And he said, yes, sir. And I ran to like the school area, because like I said, the children, once they got to a certain age, I don't know, around 3 or 4, they kind of stayed with mother. Like they stayed in school, and they stayed with her. And I got all the kids out, and we had, you know, the smaller craft. We were leaving the ship because the ship was being boarded. The way it works is they knock out your shields, they knock out your propulsion system, and then they lock onto the ship, and they cut through the hulls of the ship and then blow it out, and they board the ship. So it's almost like piracy in a sense. And I remember two of my children who had a very strong, you know, telepathic link with mother said, Dad, you have to help mother. You have to help mother. And when I looked into their eyes, I could tell it wasn't them. I could tell it was her. Like she was like trying to like get help through my own kids, using her consciousness and her strong telepathic link with these kids, because she always taught them. She was always with them. She was always around them. She had a very strong link with them. So I left. I ran out. You know, Taygetan was on the same, you know, smaller vessel that we were about to exit. He was, I told him, don't leave. And he just nodded his head, and I ran out to get mother. I came to their quarters, and they were just sitting down, like waiting almost. It was, you know, mother and elder sitting side by side next to each other. I ran up to her. I said, can you run? And she said, no. And she looked very scared. And then elder said out loud in English, he said, take her. So I picked her up and grabbed her and threw over, you know, fireman carried her over my shoulder. He ran out, caused a distraction, because the ship was telling me at this time, it was saying things like, you know, breach in Hall 3, sections, you know, 56 and 57, which was their area. So these mantises were coming. And he ran out, caused a distraction. He was killed. I ran the opposite direction to get away from them. I got to the smaller craft where they were waiting for me, and then I gave her to the navigator. I saw a flash of light, and then I felt like tapping on my shin. And when I looked at, I thought it was one of my children, and when I looked down, it was my own arm, like hanging off my uniform, and my hand was dangling back and forth, and my fingertips were touching my shin. And I looked down, and I saw, like, you know, burnt skin and bone. And then I saw something like glistening and moving. And then I realized it was my heart. And I fell down to my knees, and then I fell flat on my face, and I was, you know, gone before it was over. And I remember the navigator said to Swarouche, he said, you know, communicate with him, you know, keep him with us. And I remember she was saying things, you know, trying to keep my consciousness in my body by keeping a telepathic link with me. And I just kept on repeating, it's dark and I'm cold. It's dark and I'm cold. And then I remember I woke up in darkness. I tried to use my right arm. It wasn't there. So I used my left hand, and I felt like a smooth, round surface. And I went to look up, and I felt like horrible pins and needles go down my back all the way to my toes. And I went to feel what it was, and it was like a plug they put in the back of your neck to keep the electrical impulses going in your brain so your consciousness doesn't leave your body. And I realized I was in a healing tank, and I was in a, and that's for like major injuries, like what happened to me. And I heard the sleep, like he was outside the tank. He was still, and I got up. I mean, I woke up in a bed, basically like a regular hospital bed with like a gown on. And I went out and I saw, Swaru, my children. I saw Mother was very sad. And I said to my children, I said, help Mother. And they said, how can we help her? And I said, Mother helped you and you were weak. And she was strong. Now you are strong and she is weak. I said, just be with her. Sit on her lap. Just be with her. And they did that. I walked back to the navigator. I said, this has to be an inside job. Like, there's no way this would have happened in the ship. There's no way the shields would have been knocked down. There's no way this could have happened. And he said, you're probably right. And I was in his quarters, and I said, can I have one of your uniforms? And he said, yes. And that's when I started wearing the blue uniform that they wear, which is can handle, certain types of small arms fire, like pistols probably, but nothing like a rifle. And also there's like a button on the belt to where you could push this button and you just picture something in your head that you want to wear and it'll become that. So it could become like a suit, a woman, it could become a dress. So it's part of that blue suit. It has a lot more, there's a lot of technology to it. And it's very good at, insulating, and it felt like you were wearing nothing. It was a very comfortable suit. And yeah, that's what happened, that part, when I was in Solar Warden.
So there's another incident you described where when Swaru was pregnant and there was a meeting with some reptilians, and apparently he hit her, the reptilian hit Swaru, and then you stabbed him. So you tell us what happened in that incident.
Yeah, they have a certain, like a blade, like a knife, it kind of collapses. The front of the blade collapses into the first is in the handle, and it comes out pretty. And I had experienced reptiles, and I didn't trust them at all. And we were supposed to talk about a peace treaty, and I kept it tucked in the back of my uniform, in the back of my belt. This blade, it was just looked like a handle, and it was a navigator, Swaru, and myself, and we came up, and it was typical the way it went. The female came up first. She kind of complimented one of the reptiles. They walked up to us, and he immediately backhanded her, and she fell down to her knees. And my first instinct was just to grab that blade and open it, and I buried it in his chest. And I stood up and I looked around. I noticed all these reptiles were just staring at me. They didn't know what to think of it. And I looked down at the reptile and I pounded on my chest with the blade still on my chest, and I said, look at me, I did this to you. And when I said that, it was kind of gurgitating, making that heaving noise, and it spit up a bile on my face and my chest, and I remember it immediately just started burning like a stomach acid. And the navigator and Swaru grabbed either side of my arm and took me out into the hall area of their ship, the reptile ship. But it's kind of something they called ET tech, where there's a button and the hull of the ship in certain areas where you can just push it and a stretcher will just come out of the wall, just float right out of the wall. And they put me on the stretcher and took me to a med bed. That injury was only, it was somewhat superficial, not like you needed a healing tank. And when I woke up from the med bed, I remember the navigator said, Swaru's talking to the reptile, and the master wants to talk to you, because that's the master of the ship, the head reptile. And it wasn't the head reptile. I believe it was the first officer, the equivalent of the first officer, the second in command is the one that I stabbed. I got into a confrontation with. And I walked out, and I knew this was kind of for my life. It was their ship. I stabbed the reptile. the master came up to me and said, you know, why did you stab my man? Which is something they say a lot. You know, the first class petty officer that was actually an off-world German, after I poked the reptile in the eye, he said, I should have you executed for what you did to my man. It's something common, I believe, that reptiles say. And he said, why did you stab my man? And he said, he struck her. And he said, I don't care. And I said, I struck her, I don't care. And then I said, she carries my child. And then he kind of looked at me, and then he just turned away. And the other reptile that I stabbed came in my face, and he said, how's your face? And I asked him, how's your heart? And then, like, the master of the ship called me over, basically talked negotiations, said we only want peace. I came back to the Taygetans afterwards, and I said they're lying. And the only reason they're asking for peace is because they're weak. We should attack them now. And we did, and that led on to us boarding their ship, kind of like in the same way that the mantises boarded our ship, and we took out their ship. And the thing is, with ETs, they don't try to blow up ships because there could be technology that's been improved on, maybe some kind of new technology they've never seen before that they want to reverse engineer. And also, the reptiles will take, Taygetans as prisoners and put the AI in their body, and they kind of become their slaves. So we want those people back, and also consciousness itself. There's a way to kind of entrap consciousness, and either a cube looking device is something common that you see to trap consciousness. And yeah, it was the reason why they don't, completely annihilate ships. They try to disable it and then board it the way they do is, because there could be people that we need, people that we know, and also technology.
I see. Well, at this point, I'd like to kind of like start wrapping it up. So is there anything else you'd like to kind of share about your 17 years with the Solar Warden program? Well, maybe maybe tell us about, what happened at the end. How did you kind of like transition from being part of Solar Warden to now being back at St. Mawgan and your regular Navy NCO or sailor?
Well, when I came back, and another reason they made me the king was I was tortured by a reptile, which was actually like ancient Egyptian god of fertility, guardian of the Nile. And that was, his name was Sobek. And that was what possessed Michael Aquino's body. There was like a technology that they could take a consciousness out of a body before puberty. And the body is almost used like a vessel. And I asked Robert, I said, what the hell is a 1,000-year-old reptile, Egyptian reptile, doing in Cornwall? And he explained to me that true Egyptian history is more like 10,000 BC. I forget, what is it, 3,000, 3,100, 3,500? What they say Egyptian history is, BC? Do you know offhand?
Yes.
Around 300. Yeah. And he said it's more like 10,000. And originally the avians came, which were like, like Thoth and things like that, like the bird-like gods you see. And he said all their gods, all those pictures of gods that they depicted were real. Those were real beings. And I said, so they had feathered heads and then flesh bodies? And he said, no, the flesh bodies represented, they're humanoid like us, and they're flesh and blood like us. They're mortal. And then he said that those pillars that you hear about that they just discovered under the Great Pyramids, he said that what those pillars are for is how ETs get their power on their worlds or different worlds is from the magnetic field of their world. And those pillars are to tap into the magnetic field of Earth. Pyramids were once covered in sheets of gold, and the obelisk was once covered in sheets of gold. And so it's a good conductor. And he said it was used to create portals to their home world and also to communicate to their home world. And since they were reciprocal with the Egyptian people, it was basically like, we're going to take a part of your land, but in return, we're going to give you free energy. And that's what the obelisk was for. It was kind of like a Tesla tower. But since they were still a Bronze Age people, they figured that ET tech was much too advanced for them. So they only gave them things like power, like lighting for their homes and heat for their homes. And since they were still a Bronze Age people, they got, and tin is mixed with copper to create bronze. And they got all their tin from Cornwall, because the number one export from Cornwall to this day is tin mining. And that was why there was a 5,000-year-old reptile that was like living in Cornwall. And he also told me like around 7,500 BC is when the felines and the canines came, and they worked in harmony with the avians. And then what they say Egyptian history is when the reptiles came, and they basically chased them all off of Earth and kind of tried to erase all the rest of the history, stripped all the gold off the pyramids, and took away their power source, and just basically enslaved the Egyptians with what the reptiles did. And that was, and as far as this, integrating into everyday life, it was just something I tucked it away. Like I had the ability, like I had suppressed memories, and it wasn't until I bought my home and kind of felt safe and secure in my home, and all these old suppressed memories from childhood started coming back. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh yeah, that guy Robert told me all this, and this was only like 5 years ago this happened, where I had a feeling of being financially safe, and owning my own home, and my basically I was told that the conscious and the subconscious, like the suppressed memories are kept in the subconscious, and it's only when the conscious mind says that he's ready, like he feels safe, he feels okay, is when the subconscious will allow all these suppressed to come to the consciousness. And that's basically how everything came back to me, which I'll explain further in my book.
Okay. So when do you think you'll complete your book?
Right now I'm about halfway done, and it's just kind of like the the whole thing of writing it out, and then I'm going to have to reread it, and proofread it, and especially everything my XO told me, because those memories where I can remember everything he told me, but in the order he told me is like difficult for me to kind of place. So I'm going to have to put all that together, and that seems like it's going to be the most difficult part, is not just getting it all down, but putting it in the proper order is the most difficult part for me right now. But I would say sometime next year, most definitely next year. Okay,
perfect. And so if people want to contact you or find out more about you and listen to interviews or other things, where do they go?
My website is called DarylDJames.com, DARYL, D as in Delta, James.com. And that has most of my videos. I'll put this one up as soon as you put it out.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you, Daryl. Fascinating information. I look forward to your book and doing a future interview where maybe we can look at some of the some of the predictions you were given during your debriefing in 2005.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Dr. Sala.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Sala. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Sala. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.